The message was never meant to reach anyone. It was transmitted on a decaying frequency band, powered by reactors that had long since exceeded their intended lifespan, encoded in a language that had not evolved for war or diplomacy, only for poetry and memory. The Alaran did not know how to beg. Their culture had never required it. But extinction has a way of rewriting even the oldest instincts. Their star was dying, not in the slow, predictable way that stellar physicists had once charted across elegant equations and hopeful projections, but violently, unstably. Solar flares lashed across the system with increasing ferocity, each eruption stripping away layers of atmosphere from the Alaran homeworld. The skies, once a permanent cascade of soft violet light, had turned harsh and fractured, streaked with radiation storms that painted the horizon in jagged scars of white and blue. Cities fell not to war, but to time and entropy accelerated. Structures, designed to last millennia, crumbled in decades. Ocean levels dropped as the upper atmosphere bled into space. Entire ecosystems collapsed into silence. The Alaran adapted as best they could. They always had. They built underground, then deeper. Still, they rationed energy, preserved knowledge, archived their art. But there is a point beyond which adaptation becomes surrender stretched over time. Their scientists reached that point first. They calculated probabilities, revised them, recalculated again, and finally presented a number so small it might as well have been 0. Survival within the system was no longer possible. Evacuation, once a theoretical contingency, became their only path forward. But the Alaran had never developed faster-than-light travel at scale. Their ships were elegant, efficient, and utterly insufficient for an exodus, so they did the unthinkable. They looked outward. The galaxy, as far as they knew, was not empty. Signals had been detected before, faint, distant, indecipherable. Evidence of others existed, but contact had never been attempted. The risks were too great. Unknown civilizations could be indifferent, hostile, or worse. Opportunistic, but extinction removes the luxury of caution. The message was drafted over the course of 12 planetary cycles. Linguists, historians, scientists, and what remained of their governing council worked together to create something universal. It contained mathematical constants, stellar coordinates, biological data, and at its core, a simple idea translated into every symbolic system they could construct. We seek shelter. We ask for mercy. They did not ask for technology. They did not demand assistance. They did not negotiate. They asked. The transmission was sent in all directions, repeated continuously, a quiet pulse of desperation echoing into the void. For a long time, nothing answered. Weeks passed, then months. The Alaran did not expect a reply quickly, if one came at all, but hope is a dangerous thing when it lingers too long. It begins to decay into something heavier. Resignation. The reactors powering the transmission array began to fail one by one. Maintenance crews worked tirelessly, but resources were finite. The Council prepared contingency plans that were, in truth, rituals of acceptance. They would preserve what they could, document everything, and meet their end with dignity. And then on the 143rd cycle after the message was sent, something changed. A signal returned. It was sharp, structured, intentional. At first, the Alaran could not understand it. Their systems struggled to parse the encoding, to map the unfamiliar logic of its construction. It was unlike anything they had encountered, efficient, almost aggressive in its clarity. Patterns emerged quickly, then meaning, coordinates, vectors, arrival, times, and a single translated phrase repeated across multiple frequencies as if to ensure comprehension. Message received. Assistance en route. The reaction across the Alaran world was immediate and divided. Some celebrated, others feared, because the message, while clear, carried no warmth, no reassurance. It was not poetic. It did not mirror their plea. It was functional. And then the telescopes saw them. At the edge of the system, where the dying star's light thinned into darkness, space itself seemed to distort, not subtly, not gracefully, but with a violence that bent perception. Points of light appeared, dozens at first, then hundreds. They did not drift or glide. They emerged, ships, massive angular constructs that dwarfed anything the Alaran had ever built. Their surfaces reflected almost no light, absorbing the faint glow of the distant star. Some were sleek and elongated, clearly designed for speed or maneuverability. Others were enormous layered structures, bristling with protrusions and modules that hinted at unknown functions. And then there were the largest ones, carriers, though the Alaran had no word for them. They stretched across kilometers, their silhouettes breaking the background of stars like moving voids. Energy readings from these vessels spiked beyond anything the Alaran sensors could comfortably measure. Panic spread quickly. This was not a rescue fleet. It looked like an invasion. Emergency councils convened. Defensive systems, what little remained, were activated. Evacuation shelters were sealed. Communication arrays attempted to respond, to clarify, to ask for intent. Before any message could be sent, a new transmission arrived. This one was clearer, direct, translated almost instantly by adaptive algorithms embedded within the signal itself. Alaran civilization. Maintain current positions. Do not engage. You are under provisional protection. Protection. The word did little to calm them, because, as the fleet advanced further into the system, the Alaran sensors began to categorize the ships more precisely. Their databases, though limited, could extrapolate based on structure and energy signatures, command vessels, industrial units, and weapons platforms, bombers. The realization hit like a shock wave. They had asked for shelter, and the ones who answered had come prepared for war. From orbit, the Alaran watched as the human fleet, because that was the name embedded within the transmissions, human, spread out across the system with terrifying precision. Ships moved into formation without hesitation, as if executing a plan that had been decided long before their arrival. The largest vessels took central positions, forming a defensive perimeter around the Alarin homeworld. Smaller, faster ships fanned outward, scanning, mapping, analyzing everything in their path. And then the bombers moved. They accelerated toward the outer asteroid belts, engines flaring with controlled intensity. The Alarin tracked them with growing dread. Targeting systems lit up across their displays, predicting trajectories that intersected with thousands of celestial bodies. "No," one of the council members whispered, though no one could hear them, beyond the chamber. The first detonation was visible even from the planet's surface. A distant flash, followed by a ripple of light as an entire cluster of asteroids shattered into fragments. Moments later, more explosions followed. Precise, calculated, relentless. The bombers moved through the belt like surgeons wielding blades of fire, carving apart anything that could pose a future threat. At first it looked like destruction without purpose, but as the data accumulated, patterns emerged. The asteroids, being targeted, were not random. They were unstable, on decaying orbits, predicted, within months or years, to drift toward the inner system. Toward the Alarin world. The humans were not attacking, they were clearing the path. Closer to the planet, another group of ships began their work. The industrial vessels, builders, though the Alarin had no proper translation yet, deployed massive constructs into orbit. Frameworks unfolded from their hulls, expanding into skeletal structures that grew more complex with each passing hour. Atmospheric processors, orbital stabilizers, energy, relays. The scale of it was incomprehensible. Within days, the first of these structures activated. Streams of particles flowed between satellites, forming a lattice around the planet. Radiation levels began to drop. The violent fluctuations of the star's emissions were dampened, redirected, mitigated. For the first time in decades, the skies above the Alarin world began to calm. On the surface, citizens emerged cautiously from their shelters. They looked upward, expecting to see the same fractured heavens. Instead, they saw something new, a network of light encircling their world, faint but steady, like a promise made visible. The Council received another transmission. Phase 1, complete. Environmental stabilization in progress. Additional measures to follow. No celebration followed this time. Only silence. Because the Alarin were beginning to understand something profound and unsettling. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had come to act. And whatever they decided to do next, the Alarin had no power to stop it. Far beyond the planet, at the edge of the system, the human command vessel observed it all. Data streamed across its internal networks, analyzed by minds, human and artificial, that processed information at speeds the Alarin could not imagine. New variable appeared in their calculations, unidentified signatures, multiple, approaching fast. The system was not as empty as it had seemed, and the humans, having answered a call for shelter, were about to demonstrate exactly what that meant. The first indication that something was wrong did not come from the Alarin. It came from the humans. Until that moment, every movement of the fleet had been purposeful, but controlled, almost methodical. Ships moved like parts of a single organism, predictable, efficient, precise. The Alaran had begun, cautiously, to map that behavior, to find comfort in its consistency. Then the pattern broke. Across every monitoring station still functional on the Alaran homeworld, alarms triggered simultaneously, not from their own systems, but from the translated data streams the humans had begun sharing. It was the first time the humans had allowed their internal sensors to be seen, and what they revealed was enough to silence every room, every voice, every doubt. Multiple contacts, unknown origin, high velocity, vector, directly toward the Alaran system. The Alaran did not recognize the signatures. Their databases, already limited, returned nothing. But the humans had no such hesitation. Within seconds, a new transmission spread across all shared channels. Unidentified fleet entering, system perimeter, threat classification, hostile, all units, transition to defense posture. There was no fear in the message, no uncertainty, just a shift, a transformation. The human fleet, which had moments ago resembled a construction effort on a cosmic scale, became something else entirely. Massive carriers repositioned, rotating with slow, deliberate motion to bring entire arrays of weapon systems into alignment. Smaller ships, sleek, aggressive in design, accelerated outward in tight formations, forming layers of interception zones. Even the builders changed. The skeletal frameworks orbiting the planet, those elegant expanding structures, shifted configuration, segments folded, rotated, and locked into new positions. What had looked like incomplete architecture suddenly revealed hidden depths, weapon mounts, energy projectors, shield emitters. The Alaran watched in stunned silence as their shelter quietly became a fortress. On the far edge of the system, space fractured again, but this time it was not the controlled emergence of human vessels. It was violent. Jagged distortions tore open the darkness as ships forced their way into real space with brute efficiency. They were different from the human designs, sharper, more chaotic in structure. Their hulls gleamed with reflective plating, almost ornamental in places, as if designed not just for function, but for intimidation. There were many of them, far more than the initial human fleet. A ripple of fear spread across the Alaran world. They had seen power arrive. Now they were seeing something that wanted to use it. The first transmission from the unknown fleet did not bother with translation assistance. It was raw, encoded in a rigid hierarchical structure that took the Alaran systems precious seconds to decipher. The humans, however, translated it instantly and shared it. This system is under claim by the Korth Dominion. Indigenous species, identified as non-compliant assets. You will surrender all planetary and orbital control immediately. A pause followed. Then, a failure to comply will result in sterilization of all biospheres. The words settled like ice. The Alaran Council, Chamber, once filled with debate and fragile hope, became utterly still. This was what they had feared when they sent their message. Not silence, but attention. Not mercy, but predators. Their gaze turned, almost instinctively, to the human fleet. For the first time since their arrival, the Alaran understood what it meant to have called something powerful into their world, because now that power was being challenged. The human response came quickly, not rushed, not emotional, measured. This system is under human protection. Withdraw immediately. No elaboration, no negotiation, just a statement of fact. The Korth Dominion did not respond with words. They advanced. Their fleet surged forward in a unified wave, engines burning with harsh, brilliant light, weapon systems powered up across their ships, energy readings spiking to levels that forced Ilaran sensors to recalibrate repeatedly. From orbit, it looked like a storm rolling in. The humans did not wait. Engagement authorized. Those two words triggered something immense. The outermost line of human ships accelerated to meet the incoming force. Interceptors, small compared to the carriers, but still massive by Ilaran standards, moved with impossible speed, their trajectories bending sharply as they locked onto targets. Then the first shots were fired. From the human side, it was almost understated. Thin beams of coherent light lanced across space, precise and controlled. They did not scatter or flare. They struck. And where they struck, Korth ships died, not damaged, erased. Sections of hull vanished in clean surgical lines. Energy cores destabilized in controlled implosions. Entire vessels broke apart before they could even register what had hit them. The Ilaran had never seen weapons like this. There was no spectacle, no dramatic explosion, just the efficiency. The Korth fleet, however, responded with overwhelming force. Their weapons lit up the void, plasma bursts, kinetic projectiles, cascading arcs of energy that turned the darkness into chaos. The scale of their attack dwarfed the initial human strikes, flooding the space between fleets with destructive intent. Several human interceptors were hit. The Ilaran watched in horror as one was engulfed in a burst of plasma, its silhouette lost in the flare. When the light faded, it was still there. Damaged, yes. Scorched, but intact. Defensive fields shimmered around it, absorbing, redirecting, surviving, and then it returned fire. Closer to the planet, the larger human vessels activated their own systems. Layers of energy, shields unfolded, overlapping in complex geometries that covered not just the ships themselves, but the space between them, a barrier, a literal wall of protection. The Korth advance slowed as they met resistance they had not anticipated. Their formation began to fracture under the precision strikes of human weapons, ships pulling back, others pushing forward in attempts to overwhelm specific points. That was when the bombers moved again. But this time, there was no confusion about their purpose. They did not head for asteroids. They went straight through the human lines, toward the heart of the Korth fleet. Their engines burned hotter than before, pushing them to speeds that made tracking difficult even for human systems. They did not dodge. They did not weave. They committed. The Alarin could only watch. And then the bombers reached their targets. For a single, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to rupture. The detonations were not like the earlier controlled strikes in the asteroid belt. These were different, contained, but immense. Spheres of energy expanded and collapsed in perfect symmetry, consuming entire clusters of Korth ships in an instant. Where there had been dozens of vessels, there was now nothing but expanding debris and fading radiation signatures. Silence followed, not literal silence. Space was still filled with the echoes of battle, but a pause in momentum, a shock that rippled through the remaining Korth forces. They had expected resistance. They had not expected this. On the Alarin homeworld, millions watched the battle unfold across their skies, projected through orbital relays. For the first time, fear began to shift, not away, but sideways, because the realization was dawning, slow and heavy. The humans were not just defending them. They were dominating the battlefield, and they were doing it with a level of control that suggested this was not their limit. High above, within the human command vessel, new calculations were already being made. The incoming fleet had been assessed, categorized, and partially neutralized, but more signals were appearing at the edge of the system. Reinforcements, the Korth Dominion, was not done. A human voice, calm, steady, issued the next set of orders. Prepare. Escalation protocols. Back on the Alarin world, no one understood what that meant, but they were about to find out. The word escalation did not translate cleanly into the Alarin language. Their systems tried, cycling through equivalents, increase, intensify, expand. But none captured the weight it carried in the human transmission. To the Alarin, escalation sounded like a continuation. To the humans, it meant something very different. It meant the end of restraint. Across the battlefield, the shift was subtle at first, so subtle that even the Alarin observers weren't certain it had happened at all. Human ships did not suddenly surge forward. They did not unleash some immediate, overwhelming barrage. Instead, they adjusted. Formations tightened. Distances between vessels became exact, almost mathematical. Energy signatures, previously stable, began to climb, slowly, steadily, like a rising tide that had not yet decided where to break. On the outer edge of the system, the Korth Dominion reinforcements arrived. Unlike their first wave, these ships did not emerge chaotically. They entered in disciplined ranks, larger, heavier, and far more numerous. Massive capital ships led the formation, towering constructs, layered with armor and weapon arrays that dwarfed the vessel's destroyed moments. Earlier, the Alarin sensors struggled to keep up. Numbers climbed, hundreds, then more. The scale alone should have ended the battle. Even the most optimistic projections from Alarin analysts, those who had begun to believe in human superiority, collapsed under the weight of the data. No fleet could withstand that kind of numerical advantage. Not for long, the Korth Dominion transmitted again, their tone unchanged. Cold, absolute. You were warned. Withdraw, and your forces will be permitted to leave intact. This time, the humans did not respond immediately. For several long seconds, the battlefield held in a strange equilibrium, both sides poised, measuring, calculating. Then the human reply came. Negative. A pause, then almost as an afterthought. Protection protocols remain active. There was no threat in the words, no anger, just confirmation. The Korth fleet surged forward, and this time they did not probe or test. They attacked with everything. The void between fleets ignited. Thousands of weapons discharged in overlapping waves, turning space into a storm of light and force. Kinetic rounds, accelerated to fractions of light speed, tore through the darkness. Plasma bursts expanded into searing spheres of destruction. Energy lances carved paths of annihilation across the battlefield. For a moment, it looked as though the human fleet might be swallowed whole. The Alaran watched, breathless, as the incoming barrage collided with the human defensive lines and stopped. Not entirely, not perfectly, but enough. The overlapping shields, those intricate layers of energy, flared into brilliance, absorbing impacts that should have shattered entire fleets. Where the Korth weapons struck, the human defenses bent, redistributed force, and held. And then finally, the humans responded, not with a volley, with a system. Across every human vessel, a synchronized shift occurred. Weapon arrays aligned, not individually, but collectively. Targeting data flowed between ships in real time, creating a unified network that treated the entire fleet as a single, firing entity. The Alaran did not understand what they were seeing until the first coordinated strike fired. It was not one beam, not dozens, but thousands, released in perfect harmony. They did not scatter randomly across the Korth fleet. They converged. Every shot, every pulse, every projectile was part of a larger pattern, an invisible design that only the human systems could fully perceive. Weak points were identified instantly. Shield overlaps, energy fluctuations, structural stress points, and the humans hit them all at once. The effect was catastrophic. Entire sections of the Korth formation collapsed in seconds. Ships that had been designed to withstand prolonged bombardment failed under precise, simultaneous impacts. Shields flickered, then vanished. Hulls split along fault lines they did not know they had. Where the first battle had been efficient, this was overwhelming. The Korth fleet tried to adapt. Their formations shifted, pulling back damaged units, pushing forward fresh ones. Larger ships moved to the front, their heavier armor and stronger shields absorbing the brunt of the human assault. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The human advance slowed, and then the builders revealed what they truly were. Orbiting above, the Alaran world, the massive construction platforms completed their latest transformation. Segments locked into place with mechanical precision, forming structures that no longer resembled anything built for repair or stabilization. They were weapons, enormous, stationary, and fully powered. The first discharge from the orbital array was visible from the planet's surface as a line of pure light stretching across the sky. It did not flicker. It did not waver. It simply existed, and then it struck. One of the Kortha capital ships, massive, heavily armored, positioned far behind the main line, was hit directly. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the ship ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just absence. A perfect, silent removal from reality. The Alaran collective consciousness, spread across billions of individuals, registered the moment as something beyond fear. It was awe, not the kind born from beauty or wonder, but the kind that comes from witnessing something so far beyond your understanding that your mind struggles to place it within reality. The battlefield shifted again. Now the Korth Dominion was not advancing. They were reacting, pulling back, reorganizing, attempting to counter a force that had, in the span of minutes, rewritten every expectation of warfare they possessed. But the humans were not finished. Deep within the fleet, ships that had remained inactive until now began to move. They were different, smaller than the carriers, larger than the interceptors, unremarkable at first glance, until their energy signatures spiked. The Alaran sensors struggled to categorize them, their readings fluctuating wildly as if the ships themselves resisted measurement. A new transmission appeared across all shared channels. Deployment of strategic assets authorized. No explanation followed. The ships accelerated, not toward the Korth fleet, but around it, slipping through gaps in the battlefield with impossible precision. They did not engage directly. They positioned themselves at calculated points, forming a wide perimeter. For a moment nothing happened. Then space bent, not violently, like the earlier arrivals, but smoothly, controlled. The Alaran watched as regions of space around the Korth fleet began to distort, subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced. Light curved. Trajectories shifted. The very fabric of the battlefield seemed to twist under an invisible force. The Korth ships tried to move. Some couldn't. Others found their paths altered, their engines fighting against something they could not counter. The humans had not just brought weapons. They had brought control over the battlefield itself. Within the command vessel, a human officer spoke quietly. Containment field stable. Another responded, target mobility reduced to 23% and falling. And then, calmly, proceed. What followed was not a battle. It was a dismantling, with the Korth fleet trapped within a manipulated region of space. Their movements slowed, their formations broken. The humans advanced with absolute precision. Every shot landed, every maneuver succeeded. Resistance, while still present, became fragmented, ineffective. Ship after ship fell, not randomly, systematically. The Alaran realized, with growing certainty, that the humans were no longer just defending. They were ending the conflict. Minutes stretched, then shortened, then collapsed entirely, and suddenly it was over. What remained of the Korth fleet was scattered, broken, retreating in disorganized fragments toward the edges of the system. Some attempted emergency jumps. Others simply fled on conventional drives, abandoning formation, abandoning each other. The humans did not pursue far. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Across the battlefield, human ships slowed. Weapon systems powered down incrementally. Formations relaxed, not completely, but enough to signal a shift. The Alaran world watched as the storm faded, their skies, still filled with the faint glow of orbital structures, no longer reflected. War out to lonely aftermath. A new transmission arrived from the human command vessel. Short, simple, immediate threat neutralized. Protection protocols remain active. This time, the word protection felt different. Heavier, real, because now the Alaran understood what it cost and what it meant, but far beyond the system, in the depths of space where sensors could not reach. Signals were already traveling. The Korth Dominion had not been destroyed, only defeated, and empires do not forget losses like this. The next response would not be a fleet. It would be something far worse. Victory should have felt like relief. For the Alaran, it didn't. Their skies were calm again. The violent flares of their dying star were being filtered through the vast orbital lattice the humans had constructed. Atmospheric loss had slowed, then stabilized. Temperatures, once fluctuating wildly, were settling into something survivable. Cities that had been abandoned were being reactivated. Lights returned, voices returned, life, fragile and uncertain, began to rise again. And yet, no one celebrated, because above them, always above them, hung the human fleet. Still, watching, working, changing their world faster than they could comprehend. The Alaran had spent generations believing survival meant endurance, that if they held on long enough, adapted carefully enough, they might outlast whatever catastrophe came for them. The humans had rewritten that idea in days. Survival to them was not passive. It was enforced, and that realization unsettled something. Deep within the Alaran consciousness, in orbit, the builders never stopped. Where there had once been empty space, there were now structures of impossible scale, rings, spires, and interconnected platforms that extended far beyond the planet's immediate gravitational well. Energy flowed constantly between them, visible as faint currents of light threading through the darkness. The Alaran scientists studied everything they could see. They recorded, measured, modeled, and failed to fully understand. The technology wasn't just advanced. It operated on principles they hadn't discovered yet. Systems that appeared separate were, in fact, part of larger networks. Structures that looked complete were still evolving, shifting configurations as new data flowed in. One Alaran physicist described it simply: they are not building things, They are building solutions. Down on the surface, the first direct human presence arrived. Not soldiers, not commanders, engineers. Massive dropships descended through the stabilized atmosphere, their entry controlled with quiet precision. They landed near the largest surviving Ilaran population centers, carefully chosen locations that balanced accessibility with minimal disruption. The Ilaran approached cautiously. They had seen what human weapons could do. Now they were about to see the beings behind them. The first human to step onto Ilaran soil was smaller than expected, not physically weak. There was a density to their posture, a grounded confidence, but not the towering armored figure the Ilaran had imagined. Their form was compact, efficient, wrapped in a suit that seemed to blend utility with protection. Their face was visible, and that more than anything surprised the Ilaran. There was no attempt to hide identity, no intimidation, just observation, curiosity. Behind them, more humans followed. Teams carrying equipment, scanning devices, modular construction units. They moved with purpose but not aggression. Every step seemed calculated to avoid damage, to respect the fragile environment they had come to repair. Communication was established quickly. The humans had already adapted the translation matrices from earlier transmissions, refining them in real time. Conversations began, halting at first, then smoother as systems adjusted. An Ilaran representative, chosen for their calm demeanor and linguistic expertise, was the first to speak directly to a human. "You came," they said. The words shaped carefully. The human tilted their head slightly, as if considering the simplicity of the statement. "You asked." There was no pride in the response, no expectation of gratitude, just acknowledgement. The Ilaran hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing since the fleet arrived. Why bring weapons for a request of shelter? The human looked upward, toward the orbital structures, toward the distant positions of their fleet. Because shelter isn't just a place, they said. It's a condition. The translation paused briefly, struggling with the nuance, then continued. If something can harm you, then you are not sheltered. The Ilaran had no immediate answer to that, because in their history, shelter had always been temporary, conditional, fragile. The human definition was absolute. Far beyond the Ilaran system, the Korth Dominion was reorganizing. The defeat had not been small. It had not been insignificant. It had been humiliating. Entire fleets lost, strategic assets destroyed, and all of it at the hands of a species that, until recently, had not even existed in their operational awareness. That was the part that disturbed them most, not the loss, but the unknown. Emergency councils convened across Korth command structures. Data from the battle was analyzed, replayed, dissected. Every human tactic, every weapon signature, every anomaly was studied, and one conclusion emerged, repeated across every level of command. The humans were not operating at full capacity. What had been encountered in the Ilaran system was not the entirety of their strength. It was a fraction. That realization shifted the discussion. This was no longer about reclaiming a single system. It was about containment. The Korth Dominion had encountered emerging powers before, civilizations that rose quickly, expanded aggressively, then burned out under the weight of their own ambition. They had methods for dealing with such threats: preemptive force, overwhelming numbers, total eradication. But those methods relied on one assumption: that the opponent could be overwhelmed. The humans had just proven otherwise. So the Korth did something rare. They escalated beyond military response. They contacted others. Signals spread across regions of space the Alarin had never mapped, reaching civilizations older, larger, and in many cases far more dangerous than the Korth themselves. The message was simple: a new species has emerged, highly aggressive, technologically advanced, expansion potential, extreme, cooperation recommended. It was not a call for help. It was a warning, and it was answered. Back in the Alarin system, subtle changes began to ripple through the human fleet. New ships arrived, not in chaotic bursts, but in controlled insertions, slipping into the system with barely noticeable distortions of space. They took positions quietly, integrating into existing formations without disrupting the overall structure. To the Alarin, it looked like reinforcement. To the humans, it was preparation. Within the command vessel, the atmosphere shifted, not to panic, not even to urgency, but to focus. Incoming data streams expanded. Long-range sensors extended their reach. Patterns began to form. A human officer spoke, their tone calm but precise. Multiple long-distance signal chains detected. Origin. Points dispersed. Coordination likely. Another responded. Estimated response window? A brief pause. Then, short. No one in the room needed further explanation. On the surface, the Alarin continued to rebuild, guided, supported, and in many ways carried forward by human intervention. Food, production systems were restored, using methods far more efficient than anything the Alarin had developed. Water cycles were stabilized. Entire regions of the planet, once deemed lost, were being reclaimed. Hope was no longer theoretical. It was visible. But beneath that hope, a question lingered. The same one that had been asked in different forms, across countless conversations. What happens when the threat comes back? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. At the very edge of the system, beyond the outermost defensive line, space shifted again, not like before, not like a fleet arriving. This was larger, slower, deliberate. Sensors across the human network locked onto the anomaly instantly. Data flooded into command systems, projections forming and reforming as new variables appeared. And then finally, something emerged. Not a ship, not a fleet, something else. Massive, ancient in design, its structure defied immediate classification. Part vessel, part construct, part something the Alarin language did not have a word for. It did not bristle with visible weapons. It did not move with aggressive speed. It simply arrived, and with it, others, different shapes, different signatures, multiple civilizations, unified, watching. The message that followed was not just from the Korth. It was a collective voice. This region is now under joint observation. Human forces are to withdraw. Further expansion will be considered an act of war. For the first time since their arrival, the humans did not respond immediately. On the Alarin world, fear returned, not sharp and sudden, but deep and heavy, because this was no longer a single enemy. This was the galaxy, noticing. Up in orbit, human ships adjusted their positions slightly, almost imperceptibly, not retreating, not advancing, just aligning. And then finally, a human transmission was sent, not just to the Coalition fleet, but broadcast across every channel, to every frequency, every listening system. The message was simple, clear, and carried a weight that even the Alarin could feel without fully understanding why. Negative. A pause. Then, they are under our protection. Silence followed. The kind of silence that comes right before something irreversible happens. Silence held the system. Not the absence of sound. Space had never carried that. But the absence of motion, of decision. Two forces faced each other across the dark. One a coalition of empires, ancient and vast, the other a single species that had, in a matter of days, reshaped a dying world and shattered a war fleet. Between them, a fragile civilization that had only asked for shelter. The Alarin watched from below, their entire history narrowing into this single moment. Everything they had been, everything they could become, now depended on a choice that was not theirs to make. Above them, the human fleet did not move. Not yet. Within the human command vessel, there was no panic, no raised voices, only focus. Streams of data filled the space. Sensor readings, tactical projections, communication intercepts. The Coalition fleet was vast, far larger than the Korth Dominion had been alone. Multiple species, multiple technologies, unknown variables layered upon unknown variables. It should have been overwhelming. It wasn't. A human commander stood at the center of it all, watching the projections shift and stabilize. Assessment? They asked. Coalition force exceeds. Previous engagement by factor of 6. Came the response. Technological variance high. Coordinated command structure confirmed. A brief pause. Probability of successful defense of Alarin system under current posture, 61%. The number hung in the air, not certain, not safe. The commander nodded once. Adjust posture. The response was immediate. Across the fleet, something changed. To the Alarin, it began as a subtle shift in the sky. The orbital structures, those vast interconnected constructs that had stabilized their world, started to move. Not drifting, not rotating randomly, but reconfiguring, with purpose. Segments detached, repositioned, locked into new alignments, energy flows intensified. What had once been a protective lattice became something denser, more focused. Below, the atmosphere itself seemed to hum. On the far edge of the system, the Coalition fleet advanced, slowly at first, then with growing certainty. Their formation was not chaotic, like the Korth's initial assault. It was deliberate, layered, designed to adapt. Massive central constructs were surrounded by rings of smaller, faster ships, each positioned to support the others. They were not here to test. They were here to end. A new transmission came from the Coalition, calm, authoritative. Final warning. Withdraw immediately. This system will be reclaimed. For a moment it seemed as though the humans might respond as they had before, with a simple refusal. They didn't. Instead, something else happened. Every human ship in the system went quiet. Energy readings dropped, not to zero, but to a controlled, minimal state. Weapons powered down. Shields dimmed. Even the massive orbital structures reduced their visible output. To the Alarin, it felt like the moment before a storm breaks. To the Coalition, it looked like hesitation or weakness. They advanced faster, and that was exactly what the humans wanted. Range? The commander asked, closing. Optimal engagement window in. 5 seconds. Hold. The word cut through the command deck with absolute certainty. 4 seconds. 3. The Coalition fleet crossed an invisible threshold, a line that only the human systems had calculated. 2 seconds. 1. Now, what followed was not a battle. It was a declaration. Across the entire system, human technology activated in unison, not ship by ship, not structure by structure, everything. The orbital network flared to life, no longer a passive shield, but an active system. Lines of energy, previously faint, burned bright, connecting satellites, platforms and stations into a single, unified construct. A grid, a web, a boundary. At the same time, the ships moved, not forward, not backward. They locked into position, forming a layered defense that extended far beyond the planet itself. And then space changed. The Coalition fleet felt it first. Their sensors screamed. With conflicting data, distances shifted. Targeting systems failed to lock. Navigation controls began to drift, as if reality itself had lost its consistency. The humans had expanded the containment field, but this time it wasn't localized. It was system-wide. The Alarin watched as the stars themselves seemed to bend slightly, their positions warping under the influence of something vast and controlled. The Coalition fleet was no longer just facing the humans. They were inside something the humans had built. Panic, rare but real, began to spread through Coalition command structures. Ships attempted to pull back. Some couldn't. Others found their engines pushing against resistance that had no physical form. A new human transmission went out. Not aggressive, not loud, but carrying a weight that made it impossible to ignore. You have entered a protected zone. A pause. Withdrawal is still an option. For the first time, the Coalition hesitated, because what they were experiencing was not a weapon they understood. It was control. Total, precise, overwhelming control. One of the largest Coalition constructs, ancient, massive, attempted to respond. Its systems surged, energy building along its surface as it prepared a strike, powerful enough to shatter fleets. It fired, the weapon, a concentrated beam of energy, cut across space toward the human defensive line. It never arrived. Midway through its path, the beam bent, curved, then dissipated, as if redirected into nothingness. The coalition had just learned the most important rule of the battlefield. The humans were no longer fighting within it. They were defining it. Demonstration complete. A human officer said quietly. The commander nodded. Begin resolution. The response was immediate. Human ships did not charge forward in reckless assault. They moved with surgical precision. Targets were selected, not randomly, not based on proximity, but based on influence. Command vessels, coordination nodes, key structural units, and then they were removed, one by one. Clean, efficient, final. The orbital array fired again, not in a single devastating beam, but in multiple controlled bursts. Each one struck a critical point within the coalition formation, collapsing their ability to coordinate, to respond, to function as a unified force. The containment field ensured there was no escape from the consequences. Ships that attempted emergency, jumps found space itself resisting them. Those that tried to regroup found their allies gone. Minutes passed, or perhaps less. Time, under those conditions, became difficult to measure. And then it ended. What remained of the coalition fleet was not destroyed entirely, but it was broken, scattered, defeated in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. One by one, surviving ships powered down weapons. Signals shifted from aggression to retreat. They withdrew, not in formation, not with dignity, but quickly, desperately, and the humans let them go. Silence returned to the system. This time, it felt different, earned. On the Alarin homeworld, millions stood beneath a sky that no longer threatened to kill them. The orbital structures glowed softly, their immense power now quiet, stable. The human fleet remained above, but no longer as an unknown force. Now they were something else. Guardians. A final transmission came from the human command vessel, not to the coalition, not as a warning, but to the Alarin. We will remain until long-term stability is ensured. A pause, then more softly, you are safe. Days later, an Alarin representative stood once more before a human. The same question lingered, but now it carried a different weight. You changed everything, the Alarin said, for us. The human considered that, then gave a small, almost dismissive motion. You asked for shelter. The Alarin lowered their gaze briefly, then asked, and this is what shelter means to you. The human looked up at the sky, at the fleet, at the structures, at the silent evidence of what had just happened. Then they answered, no. A pause. This is what it takes. Far beyond the system, across regions of space that had once dismissed humanity as unknown, a new understanding spread, not through words, not through diplomacy, but through observation, a simple truth carried in data, in silence, in the absence of fleets that would never return. If humans say you are under their protection, then you are, and if you threaten what they protect, they will not negotiate, They will not retreat. They will not stop. And somewhere, deep within human space, new signals were already being monitored. New voices, new calls, because the galaxy was vast. And now, it knew exactly who might answer when someone whispered into the dark, "We seek shelter."